Rule changes that F1 got very wrong. If you haven't seen it already, F1 has announced sprint qualifying to happen at 3 races this season. This new format has definitely got some excited and some very annoyed that the sacred Grand Prix is being tampered with. Now, this isn't the first nor last time we'll see changes to our beloved sport, and this got me thinking about times F1 got it really wrong with rule changes. So let's dive into them. Double points finale. We all have a final race showdown for the title, don't we? Unfortunately though, we don't tend to see it that often. Not since 2016 has the title been decided at the end of the year, and it was 9 years ago in 2012 when the fight was between 2 different teams, not just teammates. In a bid to make the season definitely go down to the wire, the final race of 2014 in Abu Dhabi would have double points awarded. So the winner gets 50 rather than 25, second place gets 36 rather than 18, and so on. The official line was that it was to get teams to maximise focus on the championship until the end of the campaign, but it was obviously just an attempt to spice up the show a bit. The issue was that there was nothing different about the race to make it worthy of double points. Why should 4th place be worth nearly as many points as an ordinary win when it's exactly the same as any other race? It felt artificial and the majority of F1 fans were not happy. Speaking about the race itself, it was 17 points between Hamilton and Rosberg, and so instead of Lewis being able to cruise to a 5th place to secure the championship, he had to make sure he came home at least 2nd. Nico unfortunately retired from the race anyway, so it was kind of a big middle finger up from the racing gods too. Dropped results. We're going much further back in time for this annoying but well-intentioned rule. Back in the good old days, F1 cars were much more unreliable, which did not always make races more exciting, by the way. Cars breaking down out of the lead would happen pretty often, and there would be only a few cars actually finishing the race. Obviously, in a driving championship, the idea of having so much decided by mechanical failure rather than by speed and finesse left many feeling sour, so from the start of the championship in 1950, only a certain number of results counted to the overall championship standings. Drivers could simply drop their worst results and keep their best ones. The rule stood until 1990 when it became clear that it was having a bad influence on the way the sport was watched worldwide. Fans around the world would watch the races live, and if a championship contender had a bad result, it would not be dramatic at all because they would just not count it at the end. On top of that, there was no excitement over the championship standings because points would not add up in the linear fashion that championship tension needs because they could just be ignored later on. Controversially, in 1988, the dropped results system meant that Ayrton Senna became world champion rather than Alain Prost. Across all the 16 races, Prost scored 105 points and Senna only managed 94. But the results that Prost had to drop were better positions with higher points, meaning that he dropped more point scoring results than Senna did. The final standings were Senna on 90 in first, with Prost on 87 as runner-up. So you can see that it gets pretty confusing and arguably unfair, so the rule was dropped from the 1991 season. Pick a quali, any quali. Qualifying has had its fair share of shake-ups over the years. In the 2000s it became a tradition to meddle with qualifying until we eventually settled on the knockout system that we know and love. Here is a quick run through of some of the bonkers systems F1 has tried out. Aggregate qualifying. This was 2 qualifying sessions where each driver can set only 1 lap. The first lap didn't have fuel restrictions, and the second required the fuel load the car would start the race on. One of the sessions was on Saturday afternoon, and the second session was on Sunday morning, so people would just tune in and not have a clue what the grid was. Full fuel load qualifying. There was a weird rule at the start of the knockout format we know and love. In 2006-2007, cars in Q3 would have to start the session on their race start fuel load, but they could be refueled before the start of the race anyway, so it just meant that cars would go out and do lots of pointless fuel burn laps so the car was at its lightest for the final push lap. Elimination qualifying. This was probably the most hated of them all. The concept was that rather than eliminating cars in chunks like in the current knockout system, cars would be eliminated one by one via a ticking clock. After some time to set a first lap, every 90 seconds one car would be eliminated, and it just did not work. The amount of times cars would just not get round to start a lap and then there'd just be a mix-up on the grid. It was just chaos and nobody liked it, and they got rid of it after only a couple of races. No tyre changes. Moving away from qualifying now and taking a look at Michael Schumacher and Ferrari between the years of 2000 and 2004. Some years they were dominant and others were closely contested, but it was still the same winner every time. One of the key reasons Ferrari was so successful was their partnership with tyre supplier Bridgestone. They were the only top team with Bridgestone tyres and could manipulate them to work perfectly for their car. This gave them a massive pace advantage over rivals McLaren, Renault and Williams, who were all Michelin runners. For 2005, cars were required to run one set of tyres through all of qualifying and the race. Tyres could only be changed if there was a puncture and if it started to rain. The two tyre manufacturers had to create fast yet durable tyres which would work for the whole race distance. There were still pit stops, cars would refuel, but that was it. Other mechanics would flock the car to simply stare at the tyres, maybe checking a tyre pressure to look busy, but it was very strange to see nothing really happen. Michelin were much better than Bridgestone at making these tyres, and Ferrari had no choice but to run the worst tyres all season and only won one race, which was the dreaded US Grand Prix of 2005. The safety issues of running literally one set of tyres made it clear this was not at all a good idea to continue with, and tyre changes came back for 2006. Medals. I just wanted to add in the ridiculous proposed rule change, which fortunately did not become reality, but it was dangerously close to changing the entire look and feel of Formula 1. F1 boss at the time, Bernie Ecclestone, proposed that drivers are handed medals instead of championship points at the end of a race. The aim was to make the driver with the most wins or gold medals the champion, and I'm so glad it didn't happen. It was so close to happening for the 2009 season that the FIA even published research on how the system would have changed other F1 championships. 13 times the champion would have changed. One example of this is Lewis Hamilton's last lap move to beat Felipe Massa in 2008. That just wouldn't have happened, it wouldn't have meant anything, because Felipe Massa would have won if the medal system was in place. There you have it, some crazy rule changes that F1 got very wrong. Which one did you think was the worst? Are there any that you'd have included? Let us know in the comment section below.